Hello everyone, I am a federated chess player of standard federating of around 1550. I am playing competitive chess since the year 2020, and that's why I exactly know how a beginner or an intermediate level player can improve themselves from such situations which are difficult, complicated. How can they improve their calculation over the board?
So today we are going to learn about forcing moves and how forcing moves can help beginners to force their opponents into bad situations and also help them win many games in the way. So let's get started. So why beginners should learn forcing moves? The answer is forcing moves are such kind of moves in chess which will force your opponents, which will not give them many options and make them take difficult decisions during the game. And make in my words, it is not very easy to handle such forcing options, especially for beginner level players. And when you learn the art of forcing moves in chess, you can force your opponents very easily into difficult situations, not letting them give any chance for recovery, and that will make you very strong. Like, you cannot be defeated that easily, and your opponent has to be very cautious not to give you any chance, otherwise the whole game will be over. So there are kinds of boxing moves which we have to make sure, and most of the things, there are three types of forcing moves. One is checks, and checks, one of the most forcing moves, because of course you cannot avoid check, as the king is the most precious piece in the game, most important piece in the game. So checks has to be addressed by your opponent. Either it should be blocked by a piece, or the king has to move away from the check, or the piece which is giving the check should be captured. So these are the three ways you can avoid any check, and you know why it is forcing, because there is no way you can leave it. You cannot ignore it. You have to address it. So first is check. Second is captures. Captures are second most forcing moves, as whenever you capture something in chess, you ignoring it can lead to material loss by your opponent, and this can also lead to winning of games very easily. So captures has to be addressed as well, very often. And if your opponent has to ignore any capture, then they have to go through very deep and complicated calculation in order to make sure that this capture, if ignored, doesn't do much of damage to their position. So that's a difficult job, especially when it comes to beginner level players. And third is, of course, threads. Threads are a bit difficult to create in beginner level players, but it's not that difficult. It is possible. Just a small amount of practice is necessary in order to execute it completely and easily. So threats are something like, for example, you're threatening to checkmate your opponent. The opponent has to react to it. Otherwise, of course, checkmate will end the game there and there. And not only checkmate, there can be threats of capturing a piece. So in the process, you gain tempo. The opponent has to move, has to address the threat, and make sure that they are safe, and they get away from the threat easily. So these are the forcing moves that is found in chess. So how can you use these forcing moves, checks, captures, and threats in order to win games? So for that explanation, I have a very nice game by Paul Murphy, and this was a very famous game by him. It's the Opera House game. Like, he went to an opera house to play this game, but basically went to listen to opera music, but some people challenged him during that situation. And of course, he was playing against them, even though they were not very great players, and they could not stand a chance in front of Paul Murphy. Yeah, so let's see how the game goes. So let's jump to the game. So, of course, Paul Murphy was right, and he opened the game to guess it right. Paul Murphy always opens the game with the move e4. It is his bread and butter, and our opponent, of course, replied with e5. e5 standard opening theory, and knight to f3, attacking the e pawn. So now the opponents, they were not very good. Here knight to c6 would be a better choice, but they played d6. d6 is a suboptimal way of defending the e5 pawn because it blocks everything. It blocks the bishop from coming out. So that's why d6 is I can say a suboptimal move, not a very good move to play. And as opponent did not play a knight into the center and take control of the center fully. So Paul Murphy thought, why not take center for ourselves? So he played d4, and d4 is doing many things. It is, of course, for threatening to capture the e5 pawn, and not only that, it is also threatening to exchange queens in and damage the castling rights of black, which will affect black in the long run. So that's why black here played bishop to g4, pinning the knight to the queen. Paul Murphy took on e5 and bishop took on f3. Queen takes f3 and t takes e5. So now the game is good, going good. It is fine. Now you pause this video and tell me, how can you create the most fatal threat in this situation? How can you make black react as soon as possible to this threat? I'll give you some time to think. And yes, Paul Murphy, of course, played the move bishop to c4, immediately threatening checkmate on f7. As you can see, the queen and bishop are lining up towards the f7 pawn, and this threat is unignorable. So you can see how threats are created, how forcing moves are implemented during the game. And of course, opponent cannot ignore this. If opponent ignores this, then of course it will be end of the game, or it will be in very bad. The opponent will be in very bad shape. So what did opponent do? They played knight to f6 in order to cover up the queen, so that queen is not attacking the f7 pawn anymore. Knight is covering. But now Murphy is as a genius. He created another threat, and he played here. This is a bit difficult for beginners to find. He played queen to b3. Queen to b3. Now re-threatening bishop takes f7. And mind it or not, even though you might think, oh, it's taking the pawns, just attacking the pawns, but no. If you allow bishop takes f7, then even your king has to move away, and it will be very dangerous situation, as your king cannot castle anymore, and it is just randomly loitering in the middle of the board. So it can be very bad situation for black in that case. So this threat also cannot be avoided, and not only it is threatening bishop takes f7, it is also threatening queen takes on d7. So there is double threats. So opponent has to first address the f7 threat, because king safety is compromised there. So opponent, of course, played queen to d7 in order to make sure f7 pawn is well protected. Here Murphy could have taken queen takes on b7, but the problem is that if you play queen takes b7, and you might think, okay, I am going to win a rook or maybe a knight also. But no, you are wrong. You should also see what your opponent is threatening. It's not only you should threaten, your opponent. Of course, your opponent can also threaten. And what your opponent can do, what black can do, basically black can threaten the queen trade, and this queen to b4 check, and also attacking the queen at the same time. So this threat is there, and after you take queen captures, basically queen captures queen, which is forced, and bishop captures with check. Bishop captures with check. Now the game is not very clear. Yeah, black is a pawn down, but it's not a very clear game how you can win. So you should not do this. You should also check your opponent's threats as well and address it and make sure their threats are not forced upon you. So you have to anticipate that. So Paul Murphy did not take this. Paul Murphy said, no, there is no direct threat to black which he can make, and as taking b7 pawn is not good, so he said, if there is no direct threat now, I just develop my piece. So remember, if there is no direct threat to you, or you can create, and you cannot create any direct threat to your opponent, then in that meantime, you should make sure you develop your pieces. And that's what he did. Knight to c3. Simple and solid. Developing the knight to a better square towards the center. You're taking control of the central squares. The knight can jump anytime, either here or here, trying to make sure that sometime in the future they can attack. So now the opponents were not very good. They were just utilizing their moves in order to protect everything. They were thinking that protecting everything can help them survive this game. But no, you are wrong. It's just played c6 in order to not let the knight come anywhere forwards. And not only that, it is also making sure that the b7 pawn is protected by the queen. So now, even though it seems that opponent doesn't have any kind of threatening situation, they are just defending. They are not doing anything much more than that. So now Paul Murphy also played a very great move, and that is, of course, utilizing each and every piece. This is also very important. You cannot keep one piece in job and another jobless. You have to give everybody a nice job to do. And if you do not do that, then it is almost like that piece is dead. That piece is not there at all. So you have to bring every piece out. You have to give them a nice square to work on, to threaten your opponents, to pin them. And Murphy played bishop to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. And this increases the threats on the black side, and black has to do something about it. So black thought the bishop is annoying in this diagonal, on this a2 to g8 diagonal. So why not attack this bishop and make it force it to somewhere? And so black played pawn to b5. Pawn to b5, even though it is threatening the bishop, we can see that if these pawns are gone, the king is vulnerable in the center, and that's what Murphy thought. And Murphy did a brilliant sacrifice with knight takes on b5, and after c takes on b5 and bishop takes on b5, now we can see how this bishop is such a menace, attacking the king in the center, and there is not much of a defense. There is only two options for black. As you can see, forced moves, a check is giving only two options to the black. There is nothing. Either you block this check, or move the king into the center, which will be easily attacked after we long cancel, and it will be very, very dangerous for black. So here black decided we will block, and of course Murphy, already the knight is pinned pinned to the king. It's an absolute pin, as you know that this is an absolute pin and this is a relative pin. Because absolute pin, this knight cannot move even if it wants whatsoever. where this knight can move, but in turn you'll lose this queen. So that is the only thing. That's why it is relative play. This knight cannot move even if it comes. So that's the difference. So now Morpheus saw that both knights are pinned. None of them can work that easily. Nobody is able to coordinate. So why not build up the pressure? So Morphy brought even another piece into the game, putting more pressure on the pinned knights, which is long castle, bringing the rook to the center where the black king is, increasing more pressure. Now, black, of course, has to defend, otherwise the game is over. So black played rook to d8, protecting the knight twice. We can say thrice with king, rook, and the queen. Now, Murphy saw this, and Murphy was like, the main attacker in this frame is my rooks and bishop. So, if the knight is gone, there is no way black can defend anything in that situation. So Murphy said, I will sacrifice yet another piece and take this knight off the game. And now, of course, it is also forced, you can say it is a capture. So we saw all the three kinds. First was threat, threatening checkmate. Second was a check with the bishop, which they have to defend by moving the knight and blocking the check. And third, this is a threat. This is a capture. And it is threatening everything. It's threatening to take the queen. It's threatening even a discovered attack and taking the rook, etc. So this definitely cannot be cleared. So you have to be careful. Of course, black took with the rook. Rook takes on d7. And now you can see before where the knight was pinned, now the rook is pinned to the king. And what did Morphy do to increase pressure on this rook? Morphy brought the last piece into the game and rook to d1, putting even more pressure on this pinned rook. You can see how poor the rook is aligned, not able to move at all because it's an absolute pin. So now to protect that rook twice, or you can say thrice, black just played queen to e6, not only getting away from this relative pin, also threatening to exchange queens so that Morphy will not have any pieces left to play. But in this situation, Morphy knew that the main attacker is not my queen or not my bishop, but is my rook. So what he did, he played yet another brilliant move, which is bishop captures the rook with check, knight takes. Now you can see the power of this queen threatening everything, and in turn we can see how well bishop and rook are coordinated. And he played the queen sacrifice, queen to d8, check. And it is forced to take, knight takes on d8, and finally you can find it easily, rook to d8, checkmate. What a beautiful checkmate that White created, Morphy created. Not letting the king go anywhere, not escaping anywhere, and utilizing each and every piece in the game in order to win the game. And this is how you force your opponents into difficult situations, taking difficult decisions. And in turn of taking difficult decisions, when they make mistakes during making the moves, they of course land into very bad situation and eventually lose. So this is how you force your opponents into difficult situations, not letting them get anywhere easy game. And remember, it is checks, captures, and threats which dictates the game most. And this is how you win games, and fairly easily and quickly in the beginner level in order to rise ranks by using forcing moves. So that is it for today, and bye bye until the next time. So bye.